Congressman Green, thank you for being with us today.
Glad to.
I want to start with a question that has puzzled me since I started looking into this. Why is Europe so far ahead of us on biosimilars?
We have, and that's come up in a lot of our hearings over the years. In fact, I'm more tending to the FDA, and we need to give some type of judicial information from other similar markets like we have, Canada, Europe, Japan. But I think it's just because they haven't created the regimen we have with the FDA. You know, FDA started, the Food and Drug Administration was mainly food back in the early part of last century. So we created this regulatory mechanism that's, and whereas in Europe, it's, and in Europe they expanded it from 1 or 2 states to, you know, the EU now. So they have the standards. So, but it's frustrating when you see some pharmaceuticals or some products that are available there that are not here. So.
Sure. Have they run into any issues so far with biosimilars?
Not that I know of. Obviously, the last couple of years we haven't dealt with FDA, and although with the cures package, the medical research, one of the strongest point is to get the money and the ability to reform the FDA. Biosimilar is a good example. The Affordable Care Act had provisions in there, and here we are 6 years later, and I think we have one biosimilar. And but depending on what the Senate does, although I don't think they'll amend it, we started out with wanting $10 billion for NIH and $500 million for FDA. We were able to keep the $500 million with FDA in the final package that the Senate's debating now. So.
Are apart from just us having a stricter regimen than Europe, what are the sort of unique regulatory issues with biosimilars? What makes them kind of really tricky?
Well, because they're not the typical pharmaceutical. It's actually coming from living organisms. But but because of what it could be done, and a lot of us want them to be available. I want FDA to move faster. I want them to do their job, but I also want to make sure we get those out, because drug pricing is not just an issue of the last few months. It's been an issue for a good while. And biosimilars has the same possibility that what generics have done on lowering the prices of pharmaceuticals. And I think the senator mentioned that. You know, even in the Senate, they're talking about using that as a way to have competition and to address the drug pricing problems we have.
So with lots of talk of the Affordable Care Act being repealed, one provision in there, the BPCIA, is what specifically set out this FDA pathway. Yeah. Is there some sense that it will survive repeal, if in fact repeal comes to pass?
Well, the good news, I haven't heard of anyone who didn't like that part of the ACA. And I'm hoping that instead of pulling up out of its roots, we can look at it and see, okay, let's see what's good about it. You know, there's so many things in the ACA. Of course, those of you who watched the debate in 2009, you know, the House didn't adopt the Cadillac tax. We didn't have an iPad. That came through the Senate language. But there are a lot of things, I think, and I've said it many times over the last 6 years, that I think there's a lot of things we could sit down and negotiate on the ACA. Now, some of them are, you know, I don't see how you have an insurance plan without you know, having some type of mandatory requirement. You know, if you're, because I was a state legislator in Texas, and we had high-risk pools. The problem is the only people who went to high-risk pools are the people who are high risk. So the premiums would go so much they couldn't afford it. So it was worthless. So you have to have something where you have an insurance. The whole idea of insurance is spreading the risk, whether it's home insurance, cars, healthcare. You have to have people who are not having accidents to help cover the folks who are. In healthcare, you have to have people who are not destitutely ill to help those folks. And our country, in the 1940s, decided to use employer-based as a way to do it instead of the nations we rebuilt in Europe had some type of government-run plan. And the ACA is trying to build on our employer-based coverage. But I'm hoping we'll be able to see it. I know from the campaign rhetoric to right now, Although I heard yesterday some of my Republican colleagues said they're not going to have a slow withdrawal from the ACA. They want it immediately. But I don't think we want to throw 20 million people off. And there are some other insurance reforms that I think I haven't heard, like what you mentioned. But for example, the 80% loss ratio, the requirement. A lot of states have that. Texas, we could never get that in our health insurance law, that 80% of the dollar we pay has to come back in medical services. And that's part of the ACA. There's so many things in there we might be able to sit down and work out.
Has your caucus started sort of drawing up contingency plans or priorities? And if so, where would something like this be on the list? If you went to negotiate, would this be a high priority?
Oh, I think it is a high priority because, and I don't even know if it'll be on the table. That may be something that would survive easily. But we are talking about what we're going to do because obviously as Democrat, I want to have the best offense is better than defense. So we're talking about we want to be, at least in the health subcommittee, we want to be proactive and try and reach out and say these are some things we'd like to work on. And we'll see where we go from there. Over the last 6 years, all it's been, and politics has gotten in the way of good governing, but when you try to repeal something 60-something times, and it just becomes a rote, so it's hard to back away from that. But the new majority, I hope, will realize, and I think they have some of the good things of the ACA.
I heard that Representative Schakowsky had put forward a bill to lower the exclusivity period on biologics from 12 years to 7 years, on the theory that that would save a lot of money. Where do you come down on that?
If we're going to do something like that, we need to look at the whole package. Okay. I don't think you can just single shot it. It has to be the whole package. And like I said, I think biosimilars, you want that research, but you also still want to get it through through the FDA process. And again, after 6 years, we still only have one. And I don't know if that's the problem right now. So.
Could you give me a larger sense of how biosimilars could save money for taxpayers? What's the real sort of high end for being dreamy-eyed futurists about this?
Oh, I think it's, like I said earlier, it could have the same impact as generics if it has the same successes, efficiency, and it could put competition on the market. But so far, like I said, it hasn't worked out. But with $500 million, I hope the FDA will reform their approval system and get those out and the goal of cures is to get those cures from the lab table to the bedside. I've heard that for a dozen years or so. We want to give, it's great to have the research, but it doesn't do any good unless a doctor has the ability to prescribe it. So that's our goal, is to have FDA reform to get those out there.
Tell me a little bit about the controversy around labeling. It seems, coming at it for the first time, I thought, wow, isn't it just obvious that we'd want ultimate transparency on something like that? What's the strongest argument against that?
Well, if in a strict regimen, the labeling is what physicians can do, but we know physicians will say, by the way, this particular pharmaceutical or a biologic may be able to help you, but that's not why it was approved by the FDA. And we have just untold number of pharmaceuticals who have developed or, that said, oh, it doesn't work here, but it really works over here. And I think you have to have the transparency because, but again, the practice of medicine, that's the doctor's ability to do that. It's just that the pharmaceutical folks, if it's something they would like to market that in that market also, they want to. But again, without the FDA saying, yes, that is something that we've proved that can be used for that, instead of just an individual physician making a decision, which is their right under state law. We don't regulate doctors in the country. The states do that.
Putting aside any negotiations that come about around repeal, what should be on a positive agenda? To use your phrase, if you're playing offense on biosimilars, what would you like to see get passed in this next session?
Well, if it comes in the form of and it may come as a form of repeal of the ACA, and there'll be a lot of different provisions in there that we might be able to open up and change. Although it's going to be hard for me to vote for a repeal or ultimately say, well, if a repeal of some of the good things, it covers more people in the ACA, no matter what we do on any other issue. Because I have a district in Houston, a very urban district. Before the ACA, we compared to Hidalgo County in South Texas with the number of people who worked who didn't have insurance through their employer. Mm-hmm. And in Texas, our Medicaid program is pretty slim, and that's being positive with it. So it's an area that's uninsured, mm-hmm. and so we're. I want to see some way where we can keep those 20,000 of my constituents, or 20 million in the country, give or take. But also, I have about 50,000 constituents. If the state had expanded Medicaid in Texas, 50,000 of my constituents would get some type of health care instead of walking into an emergency room. So I want to see also how we're going to deal with that, because the expanded Medicaid in the states who have not done it. In fact, Louisiana actually has done it, expanded Medicaid, Arkansas. So in Texas, there's no shortage of, we think we can do everything better. I keep challenging my state legislators, let's do something better. But so far that hadn't worked out.
Yeah. When it comes to the FDA, I think since this pathway was opened, they've approved 4 biosimilars, which some people regard as a sort of intolerably slow pace. What do you think? What could they be doing better? Do you think they're being appropriately deliberate?
Well, I think that I want them to be deliberate, but I also know 6 years is too long.
Yeah.
There's bound to be a way that we can move those medications, whether biosimilars or anything else, from that lab table to the bedside, and that was one of our parts of the cures. We didn't want to just develop cures because NIH is great, but if it doesn't get us to where we can say our constituents are having this pharmaceutical or this treatment, and that's why, like I said, we've lowered what the NIH gets, but we kept the money in there for the FDA reform on a bipartisan basis. We got that because I think everybody's frustrated with the long-term problem of getting these pharmaceuticals and biologics and you name it to the market.
For the ones that have come to market, have the promises from manufacturers on savings come to pass?
Well, we're in the middle in the last couple of years of an unusual situation in drug pricing, where we have venture capitalists coming in and buying pretty popular treatments for illnesses, and they're not contributing a penny to, and I know a high cost because of the research cost, but these are folks who didn't spend a dime on research. They came in the free market system. So somewhere along the way, we need to deal with that. That if they're using it as just an investment, and then they're raising the price without putting anything in to help with the research. NIH does a lot of great research, but it takes someone at a profit-making company to take that and then go forward with it. And so they need the funding, but they also need to make sure that somebody's not taking advantage of people who can't live without these particular pharmaceuticals.
Has that particular issue affected biosimilars specifically?
No, I don't think it's affected biosimilars because we don't have a whole lot of comparisons in the market. But I think it fits in with everything when you hear drug pricing, and that's what's happening in the Senate now. There's a concern about drug pricing. The cures was never intended to deal with drug pricing. It was to deal with research and FDA reform. And but I would like to visit something on drug pricing and see what we could do, because there's a problem in our country.
I want to open up for questions in a minute, but before I do that, I just want to ask, as someone who's been on the Hill during this time of transition, are you hopeful that there might be more bipartisan cooperation around these issues during the next 4 years than there has been?
The best I could say is that we now have 6 more votes, But that doesn't get you anywhere when you still need 24 or 25 votes. But the ball's in the Republican majority. They have a president now. They have a less majority in the Senate, which I think has an opportunity for us to have some reasonable compromise. On the House side, I've always wanted to sit down with my Republican colleagues and see, okay, what can we do to fix this? But with the Affordable Care Act, and we've repealed it or tried to repeal it 60-something times. The Republican majority, and since 2010, hasn't had a saying, well, this is a law we need to fix. They just wanted to repeal it. And of course, we may see a substitute, and I'm looking forward to what the substitution would be because we haven't seen one for the last 6 years. But that's what the president said, or the president-elect said. So we'll see what happens. I would rather legislate than fight. So.
Yeah. Questions? Oh.
Hi, Zach Brennan from RAPS. I was just curious, with the interchangeability designation in the US but not in the EU, is there a concern that patients and physicians are going to perhaps wrongfully assume that an interchangeable biosimilar is more effective or safer than a regular biosimilar?
Obviously, I think that could happen, but we don't have a whole lot of evidence because of the lack of having those out on the market now. Although I've been hearing the senator, one of the best things we do is we need to, and we've required some of the aftermarket studies, that needs to be for everything, to see how a biosimilar or a pharmaceutical is performing, the good and the bad, over the period of time after it's actually on the market. So, yeah.
Sure. Kathy Sanzo, I'm here with the law firm of Morgan Lewis. And I wondered if there's been any thought about, in exchange for getting biosimilars to the market more quickly, imposing requirements for phase 4 post-market surveillance, which would then go to inform the decision as to whether or not the product should be allowed to stay on the market permanently.
Well, I think requiring post-market studies is probably a good idea anyway. And that might help. But again, we haven't revisited what we did in the Affordable Care Act for 6 years because, the politics of it. And like I said, maybe now we have a chance to say, if we're going to repeal and replace, we can actually replace it with something better. Like I said, I'm a supporter of the Affordable Care Act, proud of it, but it was the best we could get at that time, and I hope we can do better.
Questions? Okay, that's good timing. Well, thank you for being with us,
thank you.
Congressman Green.